7th, 2021 LLD Finance Committee meeting to order at 2:03 p.m. Chris, please call the roll.
Marjorie Bartelli.
Here.
Jenny Norton, absent. Liz Sullivan.
Here.
Lorna Turner.
Here.
Tatiana Weinstein.
Here.
Beth McQuillan.
Here. Agenda item number 2 is an opportunity for visitors to speak. I see no visitors in the room, and I'm assuming there's none online either. Agenda item number 3 is to approve the minutes of the February 3rd Finance meeting. May I have a motion and a second?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the previous Finance Committee meeting.
Second.
Discussion?
I second.
I know, but
Oh, sorry.
Roll call, please.
Liz Sullivan.
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli.
Aye.
Lorna Turner.
Aye. Agenda item number 4 is the renovation schedule and investment strategy.
And so we have Mark Rogers here from CCS, and I'm going to make him presenter. Let me get over to you there, and you should be able to present your screen.
All right, so grab it here. And I'll give a brief overview. I think many of you have seen this in the past, but
Ellers has not.
oh, Ellers is not. All right, so let's share the screen.
Make sure everybody can see the screen once it comes up. We got to make it a little bigger.
That's where I've got pop-ups on my side. Let's just do 40. Still not big enough. So essentially what we did, we took a look at the overall project schedule. This is the same project schedule that was included in the July board packet, so it's no difference here, but this is more for Ellers, I guess, at this point of the discussion. And we have a design phase that's ending by the end of the year. We're showing it by the end of November, early December. That's when the design phase ends. And we're going out for project funding, and that would be the issuance of a debt which would ideally close in October or November of this year. And the reason why for the October-November closing is so that, and you can kind of see that in the screen right here, that allows for the project, as it goes out to bid, to make sure that the library knows it has the money in the bank.
That would be page 4 of your packet too, if you wanted to take a look at it closely.
So we're anticipating getting the funds from the debt issuance in November at the latest. From there, there's going to be a series of bidding as well as pre-construction processes, with the construction phase really starting in Q1 of next year. And what we're targeting right now, as you look at this, between February and March of next year of 22 is when on-site construction starts, and that will continue through essentially the end of the year. And we're anticipating construction going through the end of the year, and then some closeout activities, so final billings being most likely in Q1 of 2023. The project will be open by then, but you still have that closeout process. So you can start to see from there, we backed into, or with that data, we broke down the construction contracts, the furniture contracts, the soft costs, all this different data that we have in our pro forma, and took a preliminary guideline view of when money might be spent. So that's how we came up with this cash flow. It has not changed since it was presented back in May, June, because the construction schedule, the project schedule has not changed since then. But you can start to see the corporate cash fund position. You start to use it more towards the first phase of construction. There's a blip, and the second phase of construction there's a blip, and it starts going back up after that. And then the special reserve cash position goes down over the duration of the project. What does it mean though in terms of real dollars? I'm going to jump to page 6 of your packet, I believe. And this is where I think the library would need some guidance from the financial experts on what funds to pull from to pay for different things and where to put the investments. What this cash flow is anticipating is all of the project costs are paid directly from the special reserve fund. And at a high level, why we do that is it's easier to audit if all of the project funds are coming from one account. If you're paying for project costs out of 3 different accounts, it's going to get messy and it's going to get hard for the library to track. So we for this instance, this example, we chose the special reserve fund as paying all project expenses. You can see if you add up the project expense column for under special reserve, this 131,000 for this last fiscal year, the next our current fiscal year, 5845, and then the final fiscal year of the project, 172. If you add all those up, it's 7.7 million. So if you're trying to balance out where the dollars are, that's all of it. And we've tried taking a month-by-month approach to the project expenses as well as an allowance for general expenses. And Beth and Tatiana can speak to that more, but essentially those are the expenses that you might pay for, that are annually paid for out of special reserve. I don't know if it's special consulting or whatever else. We did want to leave some number in there. You can start to see month-end balances allocated for each one. And the other part I want to highlight here, though, is transfers. So because we are paying for the full project cost out of one account, we are assuming you're transferring from the corporate fund $2.8 million. And that transfer would occur potentially in May of next year. And so that goes from corporate fund to special reserve. You also have the debt proceeds, which are expected to be $1 million. And that occurs in November of this calendar year, this fiscal year.
So the May transfer still happens within this fiscal year, though. He was talking about next year, but
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
it's
Calendar
still
year.
this fiscal year, just being clear.
Yeah, I'll say this fiscal year instead of calendar years. Let's go off fiscal years. It's easier for what this committee is. And you can start to see the month-end balance for the special reserve is fairly significant all the way until you get towards the next fiscal year when it starts going below $1 million. And so there's really two questions that I would recommend the library discuss with the financial professionals. One being what type of account to put this in. Is it special reserve, the right fund, which I think it makes sense. It can be used that way, or if a different account needs to be set up. Two being, because of the month-end balances, we don't necessarily recommend you have $4 million sitting in an account not doing anything for you. Is there a way to ladder CDs or some other mechanism to gain some interest over the next 2 fiscal years while that money is there as it's being drawn down? I will say that the month-end balance is fairly conservative. Like right now, for instance, I think in your last board report it shows around $150,000 of expenses on the project. And if you add up the 3 months that have played out, it's almost 300, so about half. I try to be conservative with this so you don't get in a position where you don't have enough funds in your cash balance essentially to pay for things. That being said, I still don't think you want to get down to $100,000 left in there to pay a contractor, because you don't want to delay the project because you can't pay a contractor. I'll stop here and ask if there are any questions. Hopefully that at a high level kind of summarize what we're looking at, but I do want to answer any questions you have.
I think Dawn and Tammy might have something.
I'm sure they will when we go. I think we can let John and Tammy walk through, unless you have more to go through.
No, I think that's it.
We can come back.
Right.
I can transfer. I don't know.
Yeah. And so you know, too, these last pages that were part of the packet that came from the project team, PMA, and these were
On page.
This would be 7, I believe.
8.
8. So on page 8, that is more looking at fund balances and total revenue and expenditures for budgeting purposes going forward. It doesn't really capture the month-to-month balances that would be seen. So that's more there for the backup.
I don't know if it's you, Mark, or Dawn, or Tammy, the chart.
I think Dawn and Tammy, if you're ready, I would almost make them presenter because they'll be able to wheel around their graphs quicker than I can.
Yeah, we can show our screen here.
I can actually do that, I think, from my end here. Okay.
No. All right. So thank you again for your time, and thank you, Mark, for your comment that actually feeds right into what we plan to discuss today. And for purposes of your finance committee, I did include here just a portfolio review so you can see where you're at right now. And then I included the cash flow, which will be helpful as we begin thinking about, pulling funds out of your corporate funds and putting them into special reserve. So, first and foremost, two things that we should discuss. You have a bond proceeds that you'll be getting very soon here. Those should be segregated. So as Mark mentioned, you wouldn't want to pool these with your corporate funds. Bond proceeds are required to follow a few different regulations as it relates to tracking and monitoring expenditures as well as meeting certain conditions for spend down.
Tammy?
So one of my recommendations would be to hold those funds in a segregated account. That is for easy. Oh, yep.
We're getting a lot of echo. Is there a way to, I don't know if it's echo, but it sounds kind of muffled. Is there a way to use a microphone?
Let's see here. Maybe if I can turn it up a little bit here.
It's, the microphone sounds muffled.
Okay.
It's behind something.
Yeah. Do you have like a headset that's got a mic on it maybe? It's kind of reverbing, so we're not hearing all your words.
Here, let me get closer and I'm gonna put this. Did that help at all?
That's much better, actually.
Okay, I think so. We have laptops, and I think it was just the way it was positioned. So
You start over.
yeah, of course. But I guess two things for starting off with when you receive your bond proceeds, we want to make sure that you are compliant with any state statutes as well as federal statutes for debt issuance. So one of the things that we typically recommend would be to hold those funds in a segregated account. So that account would be set up. It's still in the name of the library district, but we obviously want to make sure that you can very easily trace back any expenditures as well as meeting spend down requirements, which fall under what's called arbitrage requirements. That account, we could, as you mentioned, during the project expenditure, we could actually invest some of those funds so that they are available to you as needed for your project, but you can ladder them out so that you can still earn a little bit of income. On the other funds, so your special construction fund, as Mark mentioned, it's not going to be wise to leave it just sit in cash unless your bank is paying you a reasonable amount in income while it's sitting there. Typically, we've seen a lot of cash type holdings decline pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. So, and we can get into details on that later, but I guess the purpose for today would really be to explain that we would recommend you hold those segregated and make sure that you are laddering those investments to optimize earnings while making sure they're available and make sure ahead of any investor invoices that you may receive from your project manager. So as he had mentioned, you will have 2.8 million that we would be planning to transfer from the account that you see here on the portfolio review. Right now, there's actually a little over 2.2 million held in a money market fund. We've held it really just in limbo, waiting for some project refinements and making sure that we're all on the same page with what the schedule will look like. So now that we have definitely refined that schedule and you will need those funds, say, in May of next year, I would recommend that we look to reinvest those for a period of time. And then, of course, we can always transfer those into this segregated project fund. And the purpose of having this segregated project fund would be to pool these funds. And then you can always just, as your maturities come up, you can use those for your project. And as we really think through, and Mark, this is where we may need to work together a little bit more specific to month by month expenditures. It will be really important for us to make sure that the maturities line up with the project expenses. And of course, we recognize that can fluctuate, that does change over time. Projects get ahead of schedule or behind schedule, so rest assured we can accommodate both of those. We would recommend a balanced investment portfolio, very similar to what you've probably done in the past with your investments. You know, a blend of state compliant investments as well as varying maturities. So, as I mentioned before, investment yields have dropped pretty dramatically on the short end. What I mean by that is, you know, very short-term 2-3 month investments are yielding, you know, below 0.10. So if we are able to think about longer term what these will look like, we will be able to predict for you a more specific investment or income cash flow. Now, right now, your portfolio, as I mentioned, is we have about 2.2 in a money market fund, which is very much like cash. You can withdraw that at any time. We also, just for purposes of taking a look at where that had been for the last year, from an income standpoint, you had earned on your investment mix about 61,000. And then of course, if we take a look here at the cash forecast, you can see that coming up next year, or I should say the remainder of this year, you can expect to see about $12,000 still. And then next year we're predicting about 16,000. Now that's assuming you don't reinvest any of the holdings, which as we get closer to May of next year, you want to, you know, perhaps transfer those into your special project fund. It will be really important that we're mindful of making sure that they're liquid if necessary or invested to meet the project requirements. You do have redemption and pay down. Those are investments that are maturing over the next few months here. You have, you know, 2 coming up this month as well as a few in October. So you can always plan for that cash being available as well. So it really is up to, you know, at the end of the day, when we really lay out each month by month expenditure for your project, we will be able to match investment maturities to that and provide you an investment cash flow just like what we're seeing on the screen.
So you have a basic outline for what Mark just laid out, and I think moving forward then, as far as investments go, our treasurer isn't attending today, but we can work with the treasurer and Mark and you in laddering those out. That makes sense with the schedule if the committee's in agreement.
Exactly. Yep. And we would, as I mentioned, I would still recommend maintaining that segregated account for your bond proceeds, just because of the specific regulations around debt proceeds. And then we can always open, you know, an account that runs in tandem. So just like what you see here with your, you know, your Eller's account, we could open a nearly identical account. So all of the signers would be the same, all of the info would be the same. But what we can do then is, as you need funds for your project, we can transfer them over there and make sure that they're maturing when you have them when you need them. You could write checks right out of the account, or we can connect it right to your general banking account and transfer the funds there as well. So whichever you prefer. I mean, we don't have to talk about that today for the most part. You know, just know that we can accommodate and make sure that everything is segregated as needed.
The one question I had, in theory, would all of the project funds be paid, project expenses be paid from one single account? It's just a matter of transferring in funds into that account at the appropriate
Correct.
time?
That would be what we would recommend. So with your bond proceeds account, we keep that separate. And then as you know you need those funds, we would have them mature and move into your project fund.
Okay.
And it sounds a little silly, but bond proceeds, because of they are debt proceeds, we want to make sure that it's very, very easy if you were to get audited by the IRS that you can say, yep, we held them in a separate account. We can account for every transaction. We can account for all investment income in one place. So that becomes very important.
That makes sense.
And we will work directly with PMA and with your project manager to make sure that, you know, the funds flow as needed as well. And from an income standpoint, you know, a lot of this will depend upon what is available at any given time in the market. And, you know, Tatiana can probably tell you all that, you know, yields have dropped pretty dramatically, but that's certainly not a time to sit on the sideline. There is still some income opportunity, especially when you're confident in your cash flow and when you will need these funds for project expenses.
Yeah, the last time I spoke with Tammy, we were talking about that a little bit. And I know we had some coming up, some maturing, and we wanted to make sure that we had this meeting first, so everybody was on the same page, and then we would work with the treasurer and Mark in reinvesting those funds so that we had money when we need it per the schedule.
Of course. Mhm.
Did any trustees have any questions for?
What does the money market rate pay?
Right now, the money market is paying next to nothing. It is a cash holding. At any given time, it will fluctuate, but it right now is paying 0.01, I believe. Yeah, it's very, very minimal. You know, we don't like to leave funds sitting in the money market account for very long. It's really important that we, you know, kind of nail down a schedule so that we can make sure that you're earning some income.
But yet we've got 2.2 million in the money market?
You are correct, yep. Mm-hmm.
After this meeting, so that, the treasurer we'll have that meeting online and ladder the funds so we can pull in a little bit
Didn't
more.
sound right.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't,
Some more.
unless you really needed cash, we don't generally recommend that you hold it in the money market. I mean, sadly, the money market 2 years ago was paying over 2%, but now it, just like every other, you know, even the Illinois funds have dropped to, I think it's 0.05 or 0.06. So it's become pretty low on the cash side.
Will those investments be safeguarded against decline?
That is, so as with any municipal investment, your primary objective is always protection of principal or safety of principal. So investments that we recommend fall under, they're very low risk and they fall under state statutes. So for example, treasuries are oftentimes leveraged, as well as agency bonds, which are they're government agency bonds. We also will make sure that any CDs that are purchased fall under FDIC insurance levels, or we can seek collateral. So, for example, if you have a local banking partner that you wish to work with, we can always negotiate some rates on your behalf. And we have had some of our local banking partners looking to meet some of the national rates. So we stack them up against nationwide rates, and it makes it a little bit more competitive. But let's say, for example, your local bank was willing to take on, you know, $1 million deposit. We could help coordinate that. We'll make sure that it's still reported in all of your systems, but we collateralize it as well. So collateral is super important when you're thinking about going above and beyond on a CD that's not FDIC insured. And of course, we can talk more about that offline, but ultimately, yes, rest assured that the investments we're looking to make sure that your principal is protected or low risk. And of course, liquidity, we want to make sure that you have liquidity as needed for your project.
The project budget would remain the same, and then the board would then decide too, if there are gains, however small, that could be just used to replenish the special reserve fund, or if in the project there's a bunch of contingency left, if there's something that needed to be done, you can do it then.
Yeah, we can have updates on that when we see some returns.
Right.
Any other questions for Tammy? Mark, any questions for Mark on the scheduling? I think we've been aware of the schedule, but we needed to marry Mark's information to Tammy's information so that we can all start moving forward with making good use of that 2.2 million in line with our schedule. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Tammy and Don. Sorry about the tech, but we got everything we needed.
No, thank you. I'm glad we could join you, and certainly let us know how we can help.
Okay, well, we'll connect with you soon, very soon, I'd say in the next few days, maybe towards the end of the week. Okay?
That sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Bye.
Moving on to agenda item number 5, B&A review and presentation options.
Okay, so you're welcome to stay if you like.
Well, if you think you'll have any questions as it relates to the project, I can stay. If not,
I don't think so, but
We've talked through quite a bit, so.
all right.
Thank
I will
you.
bow out. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Stay dry.
Okay, yeah. Don't get too bad just yet. I think you're going to make it. All right, folks, we'll start on page 13 of the packet. On page 13 and 14, there are some examples of methods that other libraries use to create the B&A, and we just included these to show that the appropriation is sometimes a flat percentage or flat allowance on line items. So you'll see Wilmette applies a 10% allowance to each line item just across the board. And then on the flip side, Fox Valley applies either 5 or a 10% or a 50% percentage dependent on the line item. Now, the Lisle Library District has routinely opted to treat each line item separately. So we just wanted to show you that there are a number of ways to present the B&A in terms of how you get to the number you get to. If you go to page 16, this is our previous draft here, and I'm just going to go over it so everyone understands what the B&A looks like and why it looks the way it does. So we use the working budget as our base, and that's the first column, and then increase, or we show a flat number in the appropriation column. And this is based on, the increase or the flat number is based on more information as provided by vendors, and to allow for unexpected expenditures, such as if we use our utilities, higher utility bills, or let's say we get more legal fees, or if there's additional technology needs as the year progresses. So I just want to stress that the appropriation column does not indicate the intention to spend up to that allowance. It is just there to legally allow the library to spend funds per the line item should we need to do so. So the library always strives to keep within the working budget. We do this every year, and we regularly kept to the working budget in total. However, sometimes certain line items, as I said, may necessitate more expenditures, such as, let's say, snow removal. Let's say one year we have a huge snow. We might have to go above the budget. It could be $100 more. It could be $10,000 more, depending on the weather. So allowing for that extra expenditure in the appropriation is a practical and legal limit to those spending needs. But in general, the library is always kept within budget and actually under budget in total when you look at the whole pot of the budget money. And then I also want to stress, just for the general public, that the appropriation should not be confused at all with the tax levy. The appropriation is simply the allowance per line item in an accounting arrangement. So at the bottom line of the document, it shows $13 million some dollars. We're not intending to expend $13 million. That is the allowance per line item for expenditures if needed per line item. I know the math is a little bit odd in the chart because the 2.8 transfer is also counted within the project expense in the special reserve fund, but we have to account for this transfer of $2.8 million in both, because we show 4 funds. So we've got a corporate fund, we've got a special reserve fund, we've got an IRMRF fund, and we have a FICA fund. And because we are transferring $2.8 million from corporate to special, we have to show 2.8 in this documentation and this documentation. And then for accounting purposes, we have to add them up at the bottom to show the appropriation. So basically, it's just showing both transfers and then accounting for both transfers. Now, both Sikich and our auditor, Lauterbach and Amon, has looked at our B&A, and they both agree with the formatting, and they actually said, and Beth can attest to this because we've gone back and forth with them, that they find this as a clean way to present the line items. Correct, Beth?
Yes.
Okay. But we also, in your packet, created a walkthrough of our fund that also includes our revenues, and that starts on page 27, and we can walk through that.
Should we, if we have questions on what you just presented, should we stop you or should we wait till we're done?
I'm almost done, and then we can go back.
Okay, great.
So on page 27, the revenues are in green and the expenditures are in yellow. And then you can see the appropriation is on the right, as it is on the regular document. So we're going to look at the corporate fund first, and it shows that you can see the estimate of revenue, and this estimate of revenue comes straight from the working budget. It includes revenue from property taxes and grants and other income and interest. And then at the bottom of the page, there'll be a subtotal of estimated corporate fund expenses from both the budget and appropriation. And this also includes that transfer from corporate fund to special reserve of $2.8 million. And then at the very bottom, you'll see the estimate of cash in the corporate fund at the end of the fiscal year. That's June of 2022. And then if you flip the page, on page 28, you will see the next fund, which is the special reserve fund. And this shows the estimate of revenue from the working budget and also includes that revenue of the transfer of monies from corporate into special reserve. It also includes the debt certificate and interest. So all of that is revenue. And then you go into the expenditures. Those are in yellow, and they're shown from the working budget. And in the bottom, you'll see the total estimated special reserve expenses. And then there's the estimate of cash and special reserve at the end of 2022. Then you go into IMRF. It's the same thing. It's the next fund. It shows the estimate of revenue from the working budget and includes revenues from taxes and interest. And then we've got the estimated expenditures from the working budget. And at the bottom of the page, you should see the subtotal of estimated IMRF expenses. And then we've got the cash left. Then we go into FICA, and it's the same kind of explanation. We've got the working budget, estimated revenue, estimated expenditures, and then we've got the subtotal, and then the cash at the end of fiscal year 2022. And then finally, the very bottom of all of that is the recap that shows the total appropriation for all 4 funds. So that is why the BNA looks the way it does. The question is how to present the document, and we can talk about that after questions. So we can go back to your question.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it'll be easy for you. I just, I always forget under insurance costs, it's the fidelity bond. I forget what the fidelity bond covers, and that's under corporate fund, and I'm on page 23. And is that the one that insures
That is,
the board members?
yes, that insures the treasurer, and it is always half the amount, in general, half the amount of your budget, your corporate budget. So if our budget's like
Not the
4
cost, but that's what we're insuring.
Right, we're insuring up to half the amount, 1% of half.
And I'm thinking of another board I'm on, and we do errors and omissions, okay? And we have to cover the whole board. And I'm just trying to compare, is there a reason why we only cover the treasurer?
I think by statute we do,
Okay,
but
that's all I want to know.
yeah.
Okay. So the rest of us can just make
Go wild.
mistakes.
Well, the treasurer has certain duties attributed to that position in our bylaws as well as in statute, I believe, and that's why we only
Gotcha.
cover the
That was a
treasurer.
joke. Just I have to be careful what I say.
So, is there any question? So, we can go through the differences. I know I put a lot of email regarding the two, the updated draft versus the previous draft. What we did with the updated draft is we basically created more subtotals to make it more clear. We moved special reserve down. I'm looking at page 24, actually. Just to make it more clear to the public, kind of the order of business of this B&A, showing that there's a corporate subtotal of expenditures, expected expenditures, then there's the transfer, then there's the total corporate, and then you see the other two funds, and then you see another total corporate plus IMR plus FICA, and then you pull it down to special reserve, and then you add all that up. Now, the difference between the two bottom numbers is about $800,000. So from 13 million to 13.8, it's about 6.7% difference between those two columns. And if you think back to the other examples from other libraries, some libraries increase their total B&A by 5% or 10% or 50%, depending. So you could say we're increasing our B&A by 6.7% in total, but each line is a little bit different. So it's pretty conservative increase there, I'd say. Back to my question is how you present the document. So what we will do after this meeting, after more questions are answered, is we would include the updated draft of the B&A to the board in the regular board packet. We could include the green and yellow kind of walkthrough of revenues and expenses as part of the board packet, so the public could see kind of the revenue versus expenditures for each fund. And we can also include a cover page a la like the Wilmette or the Fox Valley, but not exactly. What I was thinking of is maybe just an introductory document to the B&A that said something like, the library is embarking on a renovation. The total budget for the renovation is $7.7 million. Our intention is to transfer 2.8 from corporate into special reserve, and just kind of lay that out there, because sometimes the document itself is, I mean, it's all clean numbers. It's just if you do different math, you can come up with different numbers, and the 2.8 is quote unquote counted twice, which could confuse people. But I think if we explain it in a cover letter, it might help.
I'd like Lorna to weigh in on this, because it's taken me like a long time to understand this. So, with your background, what would you recommend?
Specific on which area?
Well, on how it should be written in the package, for our regular board meeting, because that's, rather than looking at this packet, I think more of the public will actually look at the other packet for the regular board meeting. So how would you recommend to Tatiana that we do preface it with kind of the description that she said?
Government accounting is very difficult to follow. Barely pass that on the CPA exam. It's a different course. It's a course of another color in order to get through government accounting and the balancing and everything of that. Are you suggesting that we simplify it a bit for the public?
Well, I know the B&A has to be written a certain way, but kind of what Tatiana was saying in terms of how she can write a summary that the board then approves. I think it would be a good idea, but I just want to know.
In layman's terms?
Yeah.
I mean, how many questions do you think you're going to anticipate getting from the public on all of this? Again, is it more of a half a dozen people are going to ask you specifically about it, and maybe it's better just to sit down with those half a dozen people and discuss it, rather than going through the effort of writing a separate description or a separate budget, if you get a separate budget?
I will say this, is that we will be scheduling a quote-unquote hearing, and generally we schedule it at 6:30, is that correct? 6:30, so there's actual hearing. So if people come and they see that the hearing is for the packet that will be released in the next week and a half, right? And whatever we include in that packet is going to be posted publicly, and people have the right to come to the hearing and make their voices heard. And then we have our regular board meeting directly after the hearing, so that you could take that information in, if there is any, and then make your decisions about the B&A. So it would benefit us, I think, to make it as clear as possible for the public, even though, as Trustee Sullivan mentioned, the actual chart, the B&A ordinance itself has to look that way, and we have to, all of the section 2 that's got all of the numbers there, that's been reviewed by our attorney, everything on there is correct. But it might benefit us to provide like a cover sheet that,
In layman's terms.
yeah, that just talks about, because this year is so unique, this large transfer of funds is so unique for us, it might make sense to do something. And I'm not talking about 3 pages of explanation,
Just to
maybe a
provide
1 page.
transparency as to what we're doing
Mhm.
and understanding. That would be great.
I actually think it will nip some of the questions in the bud. Because I think people who, like I know, for instance, somebody that I met just through questions and answers on the financials. And he's very interested in this stuff. And because he came from corporate accounting, you know, this is not intuitively obvious for him. But if we preface it with some of the things that you've just talked about, I think he'll go, oh, you know, I understand why they're doing what, or why they're stating what they're stating. And he might even say, you know what, that answers my question. You know, if I have any more, I'll come to the meeting, and so it saves him time. And, you know, or maybe he'll send you an email, because that's always an option.
Laura? Questions for Tatiana. The last page, the crib notes? Okay, I would assume that's not something we would want to include to the general public. Question number 1. Question number 2, when you made the statement that this $300,000 difference between,
800,000.
oh, 800,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay. In light of the massive renovation that we're doing, you know, it's an increase, right? Explain what you said to me. You said it's a 6.7% difference, okay? The total dollar difference you're saying is 800,000.
From the working budget to the appropriation, yes.
Okay.
And some change, but
So,
yes.
to me, that's very simply stated, and I understand it. Is there a way to explain that increase? Okay. To me, a 7.7 total dollar renovation, and right now this increase, that is not scary to me. Am I making any sense?
Well, it's,
so if I were not sitting here in this discussion and understanding why there's an increase, in light of the total renovation, that is not, and we can pay for it, is the key, right? I wonder if there's any kind of an explanation, or do we not want to go there? Just bouncing this off everybody.
so it's 2 different, I mean, they're all related, but the increase from the working budget to the appropriation is about 800 and change. That is I would say, a modest
Right.
increase for an appropriation versus what I've seen at other libraries. And the 7.7 million project would be, if you're looking at the chart of 13 million, that kind of math is interesting, because you have to subtract 7.7 and then subtract another 2.8 from that 13
Right.
million. Then you get to our just regular budgeted expenditures. But we could talk about that. I just don't want to confuse, you know, I don't want to put in too many
Well, and
explanation.
that's why I'm asking.
But, I mean, I think talking about a modest increase to the appropriation is fine to, tell the public. I think that's evident. I mean, 800,000 from working budget to appropriation is pretty modest.
Would you think the general public will be able to arrive at that number without the explanation you gave us? Does it matter?
Probably not, but you can explain it that way too.
Well,
And I would suggest perhaps, once the packet gets posted, that you request, if you have any specific questions, to submit them ahead of time, so we're not surprised, that we're gonna anticipate that Margie's gonna ask about this whole increase in appropriations and things of that sort. So you might not get any responses, but it might give you a heads up as to what you are gonna be expected to answer to.
Do you answer at the hearing?
No.
I'm sorry, Liz, what did you say?
Is it a two-way communication at the hearing? Do we answer questions?
Right.
It's not, but it could be. You could have the hearing, and then during the meeting, you could, depending on the agenda, the president can write the agenda, you could have an option to address.
Submitted questions, or previously,
But
earlier submitted
on every
questions,
agenda,
whatever
we
it
have
is.
the ability to email or every agenda has that stated on it. You can submit questions for a particular time of the day, and we would take those.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that, I'm asking, and I'm also good with the meeting going the way we normally have it. I mean, I'm totally fine, I finally understand, and you and I spoke on the phone earlier today, clarified some things. And always, but my objective is always to make it the easiest for people who don't have our information, without making it overly complicated and confusing the issue. So just wanted to run that by everybody.
Well, and Chairwoman Turner said we could put a statement in the cover letter that says it was a modest increase of 6.7 above the working budget to account for any unexpected expenditures. So we could say something like that.
And you're being completely transparent there.
Exactly.
So somebody doesn't come up in the meeting, go, what is this 6.7?
Right.
What was explained? It's not as increase.
Or why is the working budget 13 and the appropriation 13.8? Why is that? In that cover letter, we can say.
It's previously explained.
Yeah.
That would work.
Well,
And, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Liz.
And I would even go, my marketing communications is coming out here. I would even go one step further, and I would say, from several of the libraries surveyed, this, whatever you want to call it, this increase falls between 5 and 10%. And that way, you're giving them already, hey, we're right in the middle.
Yeah. And Beth and I were both looking online. A lot of libraries don't post their BNA or their explanation online. They just post the ordinance. Some do, some don't. So we tried to find some. There were some that I think we contacted. Their working budget is $5 million. They make their BNA $10 million. They just double it. Just to make it easy to allow for. Now that's 100% allowable. It's just how particular do you want to be with your financial document? Again, the appropriation is not the intention to expend.
Right.
It's the allowance. So we've been pretty meticulously attending to every line item and kind of judging it from year to year and how much we may go over, and we give it a good estimate of, well, maybe it's got to be $10,000 more in case we get a big snow or something like that. So we've been really transparent and thoughtful about each line item every year. But that's a good way to go, is that, on average, this is a modest increase, and it's, between 5 and 10%, which is...
Or you could say it's between, other libraries do between 5 and 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Truly.
I think the key that you just said, it's not the intention to spend.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's the allowance. I mean,
For unexpected expenditures.
Yeah.
exactly.
And historically,
We come in under budget every year.
I don't know that I would say under budget, I would say under BNA. because there is the feeling that if you come under budget, you're not budgeting well.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so I would just say, historically, the library, has not spent the full B&A amount.
Yeah, and you cannot legally spend above it, ever.
Right,
So we could say we come in significantly
Yes.
under the B&A.
yes.
Yeah.
And then is the subsequent year adjusted? Say you go over by 10%, would you adjust the next year only going over 8% because you didn't spend the first year, the prior year?
If you go over the budget,
I mean, not over the budget, we fell 10% less. We over appropriated, didn't spend everything that was appropriated. Do you adjust the budget for the next year? Or is just general price increases take care of that?
there's always price increases, but we can't, if we go over the budget, if we go into the appropriation, we use that to create the next year's budget.
Okay.
So
That's my
I'm
question.
just
Yeah,
using
that's what I'm
snow
saying.
over and over again. So
Yeah.
like, let's say every year we get more and more snow, we would adjust the next year's
Right.
budget and then determine the appropriation for that next year. So, every year we're getting more and more snow, we're gonna budget a little bit more this year, but we would always have a little cushion just in case. And that's what the appropriation is for.
So I think we're in agreement that we would front end this with maybe a paragraph to a couple paragraphs that would make it easy to understand, but also allow people to understand that we have no intention, the library has no intention of spending this. But this gives us the flexibility if something, an unusual expense does come up.
Gives us the allowance.
Yeah.
I'm taking notes. And I will draft this with those notes, and if you have anything else, you can send them to me. And that draft will be in the regular board packet, so on the Friday before. So if there's anything that you find missing or whatever, you can send it to me, and then before we publicly post it on the Monday.
Okay, great.
I realize that Jenny's not here. Is that something that you could discuss with her? I mean.
Yeah, I told her we would connect after.
Oh, okay, great.
And we'll have to anyways, because I'll have to update her with Tammy, and she'll be in on that investment conversation as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Did you, last question from my notes, the yellow and the green, the revenue and expense spreadsheet that started on page 27.
Loved it.
Should that be in the board packet as well, just as an explanatory document?
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
Loved it. For those of us that need things simplified, it helped.
All right. Great. Is there anything else you'd like me to add to the summary, or?
It's interesting because I printed the package at home. And so I know the difference between seeing this in gray versus seeing it in color. So, huge difference.
Ms. Whitman? The last item on the agenda is adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Any discussion? I don't think we need a roll call, do we? We do it.
You can do a voice vote.
Voice vote. Anybody against it?
Aye.
Okay. All right, we're adjourned then at 2:57.
Come on.